Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation. So for all you Audie fans, my little bad boy has been in a very strange mood for the last couple of months. We've had weird weather. He's been angry with me about that, but also he has been sleeping in different places around here, just unusual places. I want to go sleep on a chair. Or, my favorite, I want to stretch out in the middle of the hall and you could just step over me. Now, this was, I don't know, I guess it was curious for me because he has a little nest at the foot of the bed. Whenever I make up my bed, there are two pillows. They sit side by side at the foot of the bed. I have a blanket over top of them, and because it's two pillows, there's sort of a little dip in between them, so Audie can nestle in there and he can have a little nest for himself. And he had been shunning his little nest for a couple of months. Guess where he is today? He's back in his little nest on the bed. And yes, he was there yesterday too. So that signals to me that all is right in his little kitty universe, and I like when that happens. So I don't know if he is going to come out. He seems very happy there. Oh, back to what I said. I think I may know why he's returned to his little nest, because I have a ceiling fan in the bedroom. I can turn that on low, so there's a steady little breeze. When it's on low, it's a small breeze. And if I leave the window open, then he's got a bit of a cross draft. The breeze from above the window, and of course the sun comes in the window. And I think perhaps with the dark, gloomy weather, that little nest just hasn't been very inviting. So, as I say, I'm deliriously happy because I don't want my cat to be miserable. And when he's miserable, he makes sure I know about it. So this is just good news as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if he will show up. Last time I saw him in his little nest, he was dead to the world. I was walking around the bedroom opening drawers and he didn't even look up. So maybe he is just sound asleep. We'll have to wait and see. So let's take a quick look at the intro and we'll be right back. So, I thought we would talk about something we don't usually discuss on this channel, but it's something that I actually know a lot about because I studied it, and something that I make a half-hearted effort to employ in my daily life. And I was in the kitchen washing dishes at the sink today when I realized I could improve the way I do this because I am right-handed. So logically, I should be moving dishes from the left side of the sink over to the right. Right-handed, that makes more sense. However, I am in fact going right to left. And there was the epiphany. So, let me just give you a bit of a preface to this because we are going to start talking about Japanese management techniques. Around the turn of the century, and this would, well, a little before then, basically 1880s onward, improving industrial production in the U.S. was something people were starting to look at. And this was the very, very early stages of what we later identified as industrial engineering. People would look at how work was being done and trying to formulate ways to do it better, save a little time, Now, the major thinker in the early days of this industrial engineering move was a guy named Frederick Taylor. And tailor, in fact, I will tell you this, in the mid-20th century, industrial engineering was often called Taylorism, as well as time study engineering. And what Taylor wanted to do was improve the way things were done by streamlining processes, making everything a little easier, a little more efficient, a little less wasteful, a little more cost-effective. That's the early 20th century. As we move forward and we get into the 1910s, 1920s, there were a couple of other names that came up in this. And that was Frank and Lillian Galbraith, a husband and wife team. And here's the reason I'm throwing them in. Well, actually, the reason I'm throwing them in is they deserve to be here. They were pioneers in the field. But these are people whose work you're probably familiar with, even though you might not be able to put it together. Frank Galbraith wrote a book called Cheaper by the Dozen, and he wrote the book in the late 1940s. It became an instant smash hit, and then in the early 1950s it was made into a movie starring Clifton Webb, and then it was remade, and I think this was in the 1980s, starring Steve Martin. And the reason I'm saying the 1980s is Steve Martin was in everything in the 1980s. So you may well have heard this or seen the movie. It was the story of these two industrial engineers, Frank and Lillian, and their 12 children and all the fun they had trying to run their household according to the principles of industrial engineering. So, and most people do not realize that in addition to being a best-selling author, Frank Galbraith was a leading pioneer, as was his wife, in the industrial engineering movement. So, we've already fast-forwarded past the Second World War, so let's turn the clock back a little. In the Second World War, industrial engineering, Taylorism, time study engineering, became very important to the war effort. For the first time, we really, not just as a country, meaning the United States, but we as a society globally were unbelievably reliant on industrial production to aid the war effort. Prior to that, wars have mostly been, guys out on the field fighting, hitting each other with clubs and swords and whatever. And industrial production became incredibly important in the Second World War. And that was when industrial engineering really started getting a foothold, when people started to pay attention, because it was so important, what was critical to the war effort, to make sure that the industrial machines were operating properly, that things were coming off assembly lines, not just quickly, but defect-free, because you don't want to send something out into the field that is going to blow up in the faces of your own soldiers. That's counterproductive. So, now we just fast forward to the period that was slightly past the Second World War, and we have to move over to Japan. Now, philosophically, industrial engineering in the U.S. was very popular with management, but not at all popular with labor. Working people and unions, so, it was just the whole group of labor as a large designation. Labor didn't see it as a good thing, management did. Labor saw it as a way to sort of eke out every last drop of productivity for the workers without any regard to their health or happiness, and that's actually not true, because industrial engineering absolutely considered the welfare of the workers as one of their primary markers in terms of success. If the workers were not happy, if the workers were being injured, if the workers were being overworked and they were tired, then the industrial engineer had failed to do his or her job properly. Nevertheless, there was a certain resistance here in the U.S. So a guy named Deming, I want to say Frederick, but I'm not really sure. Deming brought this over to post-war Japan. Let me tell you how to do this. Well, because Japanese society had very different cultural values, and they were not, they're a very homogeneous society, very collective-oriented, and they were extremely receptive. And the Japanese took the principles of industrial engineering, and they gave it a name that they had in their own culture. It's Kaizen. And that name actually comes from something they borrowed from the Chinese. So they took an American principle, gave it a borrowed Chinese name, and really went to town with it. So Japanese Kaizen is the process of making tiny incremental improvements to reduce waste, to save time, to save materials, to make the job easier for the workers, to reduce errors and defects, improve the quality of the product that left your facility at the end of the day. And it's interesting because, remember, we came up with this here in the US, and then in the 1980s we began importing Japanese systems because they were so effective in terms of management and production, and we just sort of brought industrial engineering back to the US, declared it to be Japanese and with the Chinese name, and said, here, Kaizen, it's Japanese, let's do it. And for some reason, and I believe that reason was a different time, a time when people were inherently less suspicious of management. They brought it back and it was received very well. So that's what we are talking about. And I did want to give you the history of Kaizen because a lot of people erroneously believe this is a Japanese system. It is not. This is an American system that just sort of went through a period of refinement, a period of Kaizen, if you will, in Japan, and came back to us in a nicer package. So, back to doing dishes in the kitchen sink. There are so many areas in our lives that could be dramatically improved just by a little bit of Kaizen. Small changes, tiny changes, changes that cost nothing, changes that are relatively easy to make. Could I switch the way I do my dishes? Of course I could. All I have to do is pick up that dish strainer and put it on the other half of the sink. Yeah. And even though I am a big believer in Kaizen, I've never done it. And the reason I've never done it is because I tend to think of these things as, you would Kaizen something in an occupational setting, but not in a domestic sphere. But of course, it works in every sphere. The Japanese do this sort of thing within their own households, as well as, on the factory of a Toyota plant. So, can we do this? Of course. And, well, like I said, I gave you the example of dishes in the kitchen sink, a small change. So, I'm throwing this out to you because I think most of us would benefit. Now, keep in mind, the principle of Kaizen is you don't need to make big changes. Any change you make, no matter how small, is probably going to have a cumulative effect on whatever it is you're doing. Enough teeny-weeny little changes can be just earth-shattering. By the time they accumulate enough of these changes, they could change everything. So, when I look at things like, am I doing dishes as efficiently as I could? My resistance point, we've got to overcome the resistance. That's always the thing. My resistance point is, yeah, but who cares? Does it really matter if I'm doing dishes in the most efficient way possible? Well, yeah, it actually does. Because getting the dishes done, even if I only save myself 20 or 30 seconds, if you add that to figuring out how to clean my bathroom 20 or 30 seconds more quickly, figure out how to make my bed 20 or 30 seconds more quickly. At the end of the day, I have a block of time. And if I do this with everything all day, all the time, my cleaning, and I'm not fond of cleaning, I'm really not, but my cleaning has become faster, more productive, more efficient, and I'm getting a better result at the end of the day. I'm looking around, I'm seeing the job has been done, instead of looking at this saying, I don't want to do those dishes, it's such a pain in my butt. And part of the reason it's a pain in the butt is because I'm probably not doing it as quickly and efficiently as I should. So I guess the next step is, how do we identify the changes? Because we don't have time management people coming into our homes saying, hi, I am your industrial engineer for the day. Let me show you how to do this. But there are still a whole bunch of resources for us. And what I plan to do, and this is sort of a back burner kind of plan, over the next few weeks, I'm going to start checking out YouTube videos on things like how to more effectively clean the bathroom. I also, and here's where I sort of depart from the efficiency expert point of view, I'm probably going to check out some of those videos that are made by people who are following like the house cleaning guides from magazines or books from the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1950s. How are they doing it? Because part of the rationale I have is our mothers and grandmothers did this as their jobs. This is what they did. They were housewives or homemakers or domestic engineers, depending on which generation you talk to. And so they would get up in the morning. They had one job to do, which was maintain, well, they had 1,000 jobs to do. But overall, it fell under the umbrella of maintaining a clean, safe, healthful home. That was their job. And most of them did a pretty darn good job of doing it. It's not like, people would look back on that and say, oh my goodness, my grandmother kept such a shabby house. My grandmother actually did not, neither one of my grandmothers kept a shabby house. Even my paternal grandmother, who worked all her life, she worked well into her 70s. And she was highly trained and she was a professional. So, of course, she was going to work. She was not going to just sit home and clean the house. But my mother's mother, on the other hand, was a homemaker. Both of them ended up with the same result, meaning they've probably figured out ways to do this that are more efficient and more effective than what I'm looking at. So that's one of the reasons that I'm going to start taking a look at older housekeeping techniques. Also, I do have to say that I like the idea of cleaning with fewer toxic chemicals. I don't go around licking the kitchen counters, but I have a cat, and, well, I mean, he's a cat. He's going to lick weird things. I can never predict where that little cat nose is going to show up next, and I'd just as soon he not be licking up caustic or toxic chemicals. So I am going to take a look at this more closely than I have in the past and see if maybe I can pare down that bucket of cleaning supplies I have. That's another Kaizen thing. Maybe I will see if I can reduce that. Because, of course, if I can, that'll be an improvement on a lot of levels. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you, because I realize that for most of us, we talk about cleaning out stuff and downsizing and getting rid of clutter and making our lives easier. And frankly, the warm weather is coming. This is a good time for spring cleaning. It's a good time to look at this. Right now, I am shifting my clothing. My winter clothing is getting boxed up for the winter. I say this while I'm wearing a wool sweater. I know. Problem there. Our weather hasn't settled out yet. I've probably got 2 or 3 more days when I really will be, running around in wool sweaters in the daytime. And then, because this is Pennsylvania, it's going to go from wool sweater weather to I am so hot I think I am going to melt weather, and that'll happen overnight. All right, pardon the digression, just complaining about my weather yet again. So anyway, that's what I wanted to throw out. Kaizen. I thought if this is something that is interesting to you, we can take a look at Japanese management techniques in more detail, because Kaizen is just the overview, small incremental changes. They've got a whole system for how to make these small incremental changes. And books have been written about it. There's so much information out there. But I figured if I gave you an overview, that would probably be enough for you to decide if you want to take a look at this. I am going to take a look at it one way or the other, because I do think I need to get myself into a mindset where I'm looking at cleaning as less of a chore, less of a hardship. Oh, poor me, I have to get up and clean something. Yeah, first world problems, right? I'm sure there are plenty of people in this world who would be very, very happy to have a home to clean and would probably look at me like I was just the most ungrateful creature on the earth. I have a roof over my head and I'm complaining about it. Yeah, I get it. But I would like it if I could make this a little easier on myself, if I could get some systems in place in which I can do this more effectively. And I have never had really good housekeeping systems. The reason for that is, of course, I worked. And yeah, Miss Dobbins like, yep, it's hard for me to say this out. Yes, I worked, and I had a cleaning lady come in to deal with the household because I worked, and I felt that I was spending enough of my time in employment, and I could easily afford to bring someone in to do the cleaning because I was working, but I never really developed good systems on my own. And I think it's about time I started doing this, because I'm sure I'm making it more difficult on myself than I have to. I'm doing my dishes in the sink backward. backwards. I'm going right to left. I should be going left to right. What am I thinking? Why is this something? And I look at that, and as I said, it's just a question of picking up the dish strainer and moving it to the other bowl of the sink, and then I could do it the way I'm supposed to. But even as I say that to you, I think to myself, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that. Maybe I don't. There must have been some reason I did it this way in the first place. I don't know. If there was a reason, I have long since forgotten it, so it couldn't have been all that important. Anyway, let me know in the comments, do you want to take a look at this? Where do you think you could be? Motorcycle. Where do you think you could be making improvements? How do you think you could make this work for you? Because right away, as I think about this, as I said, I'm packing away my winter sweaters, and I could make a lot of improvements in terms of how I pack my sweaters and where I pack them, because I'm not sure I have been particularly effective in how I have done this so far. I have moved from stacking my sweaters up in document boxes, no kidding, to little specialized cubbied compartments, little cubby things where you stick your shoes in, taking a sweater, folding it, rolling it up, sticking it in there. I haven't come up with a system that's really working for me yet, but I am actively looking for that. And I have been. I have moved from the document boxes to the little shoe cubbies, and now I'm thinking I really need to put them in a trunk or a large box so they're all in together. Of course, the problem with that is that if they're stacked one on top of the other, I won't ever know what's at the bottom. So I got to rethink that one. But the idea of making some improvements that would make my life easier is very, very attractive to me. And I imagine it must be attractive to a lot of you as well. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? Do you want to start talking about Japanese management techniques? Do you want to start talking about vintage cleaning techniques? How our mothers and grandmothers, etc., did it in years past? Because I'm starting to think this is something that I could learn from this, and I would love to, because learning how to make my life easier, oh yeah, I'm a fan of that. All right, so again, let me know in the comments. Thank you for being with us. For those of you who stay with us for the Just Chatting, that is going to be 8 o'clock this evening, New York City time. For everyone else, I certainly hope to see you back here again next weekend. We're going to take a look at a slideshow on the way out. And meanwhile, have a terrific day.